Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel Noor Networks. In this tutorial, we will be configuring a user-based policy to see how the client-based authentication works, and thereafter we will be configuring a local authentication mechanism like by creating a local user in the Sophos XG Firewall, and we will try to authenticate through a local authentication, and we will see how this user-based policy works through a local authentication. So today's agenda is we will be recalling a user-based firewall rule for web authentication, the one which we have configured in our last tutorial. Although we won't be going much more in the detail over here, but quickly I will be configuring a user-based firewall rule so that we can go ahead with the client-based authentication using the same rule. We will be installing a client in our local computer, and concluding we will be looking after the local authentication by creating a user locally in the Sophos XG firewall. Just we will have a quick look on the network design. This is our network design where we have deployed an Active Directory in the LAN network. Thereafter, we have two computers with the IP 10.1.1.150 and 10.1.1.100. 10.1.1.150. This particular computer with the IP 10.1.1.150 I have placed in the domain. This computer is in the domain, whereas 10.1.1.100 is not in the domain. Let's proceed with the configuration. As I have explained you in our last tutorial, that for configuring a user-based policies, there are some prerequisites. Pre-configuration is required. The first thing is authentication. Over here, very first, again we will look with the Active Directory authentication. Then we will look for the client authentication using the same Active Directory users, and finally we will be looking after the local authentication. Going to authentication, this was a server which we have added in our Sophos XG firewall and imported all the users and groups from Active Directory. This you can see the users imported, and these are the groups imported from Active Directory. Very first thing which we have to do is we have to add our AD server in the authentication server list. Just click on this. This option will set authentication method same as firewall, same as above, and you apply. This will also be added. So you have added the firewall authentication method, and you have keep this box checked, set authentication method same as firewall, and you can see the AD server is added through in this authentication list also through this configuration what you did over here. Next comes a VPN authentication. This all authentication we will look when we will be doing a VPN tutorials. Now, as if now I'm not looking after this, just we will skip out these things because we are not configuring any VPN authentication for now. The web policy action for come to the last of this page, scrolling down, it is web policy action for unauthorized unauthenticated users. It is saying cannot be configured from authentication, and that authentication web authentication. So we will move to web authentication over here. In the same page, the next tab, web authentication. Over here it is saying authorize unauthenticated user for web access. If Active Directory SSO is configured, ADSSO mechanism, we will keep this as default. And over here, if ADSSO isn't configured, when unauthenticated user reaches a block page, so we will say show captive portal link. For the unauthenticated user, show a captive portal link. Okay, so what is captive portal link? I have explained you in our last tutorial. Just I will give you a brief. As you can see that firewall access rules that require authentication to access the internet or various network resources, you can have these firewall rules that require authentication to access the internet or various network resources. So if a user is trying to access the internet or a network resources and their authentication through single sign-on, Active Directory or any method have failed, or they are not an authorized user of the Active Directory or any SSO radius server, in that case captive portal allow the user to authenticate to the firewall and gain access to the internet or network resources. So in short, you can say captive portal provides a last resort authentication method to the firewall. Okay guys, so you will say that if when unauthenticated user reaches a block page, show captive portal link. Okay, captive portal behavior, this all thing I have explained you in our last tutorial. We will keep these things as default as it is. Captive portal appearance also I have explained you in the last tutorial. This was the preview, default preview. We will keep the default preview as it is, so you don't need to do anything over here. Moving on, just we need to check the device access. Since we are configuring the policy from LAN to WAN zone, on the LAN zone we need captive portal and client authentication to be enabled. The captive portal is enabled as well as the client authentication is enabled, right? we will keep as it is, the default setting. Quickly, we will create a policy, a firewall rule we will create for a user-based authentication. Over here in our starting tutorials, we have created a LAN to WAN policy, LAN to WAN firewall rule, which is from LAN to WAN. Source zone is LAN, source network is client PC, that is PC1 and PC2. Let me take you to the network design. This 10.1.1.150 and 10.1.1.100. I have used IP host group over here, and I have added two IP host client with the name client PC1 and client PC2. The IP addresses are 10.1.1.150 and 10.1.1.100 respectively. I need to schedule this policy for full time. I will say all the time. Destination zone WAN, destination network any services are as required for the internet. That is HTTP, HTTPS, DNS. Over here on the match known user, I will just click on the match known users. User or group, I will say any, or even you can select from the Active Directory users and group. For now, I am keeping any, and I will say use web authentication for unknown user, so that when you check this box and you have defined that if any unauthentication user comes, just redirect to the captive portal. So it will redirect to the captive portal. Just you have to check this box, use web authentication for unknown users. And I'm not interested to configure web filtering, application filtering, or IPS policy, because we are purely looking into the user based policies. So this we have already discussed in our previous tutorials. I will simply save the configuration. I will try to call the internet from using this rule. So you can see now I am being using this policy. I'm getting the captive portal over here, and I'm in the PC1, which is under the domain. I have accessed this PC through a domain user. Okay, I will put the username, one of the username which we have created in Active Directory. I have shown you in our previous tutorial. And I'm login. I have a call for the google.com and it is opening. Let's try some other website. Let's say yahoo.com or YouTube. Everything is working, right? Okay, let me go to the client PC, which is not in the domain. Unauthenticated user, you can say. I will open the browser. And I will try to call the link. I'm trying to reach to Google and it is not reaching. So again, I will repeat what I have informed you in our last tutorial. See, if any unknown user trying to access the internet should be redirected to a captive portal, this we have defined in the rule and the authentication mechanism in the captive portal option as well, right? That any unknown user trying to access the internet should be redirected to captive portal. But here it is not redirecting. Why? The reason is very simple. On most of the networks, DNS settings are inherited on the WAN port from the internet service provider. So when you are blocking WAN access for unknown users, they cannot reach the DNS server that is out on the WAN. Right? For the known user, it's okay. But for the unknown user, they cannot reach to the DNS server that is out on the WAN. So therefore, a user trying to access the internet where authentication is required will not be redirected to captive portal. What is the solution? A separate firewall access rule that does not require authentication is needed for WAN DNS access. Quickly, we will create a DNS rule. This is the solution. I will give the name DNS rule. I will position it on the top. Action is accept. I don't want to keep it under group, any group. I will say none. I will log the firewall traffic. My source zone is LAN. I will keep the source network any, schedule for all the time. Destination zone, I will say WAN. Destination network will be any. Services, I only need DNS service because I am creating only a DNS rule. Select on DNS. We will create a linked NAT rule over here. And you know what to do over here. Simply you have to change the NAT option to MASQ. The SNAT will be MASQ, and you will save it. You will save the NAT policy, and then moving on. Over here we won't be applying any web filtering, application filtering, IPS, because we are not having any interest to do any kind of configuration over it, because we are learning our user based policies. Okay, simply you will save the rule over here. Okay guys, so the rule is saved now. What we are going to do the next is, we'll move on to client PC 2, the authenticated user. I will just close the browser and open again. Over here I will again try to go to internet. It's called google.com. It is saying me, see, this is a browser, somewhat my browser issue, that's the reason, or else it would have redirected you to the captive portal. Okay, I will say open network login page, and I have got the captive portal over here. I will use one of my other user which I have created on active directory. I will try to log in, and it is signing in, and it is taking me to the internet. It's opening Google. Let me check for some other website, like let's say yahoo.com. It is reaching. So now the internet is working on this PC as well. Okay. Okay, moving on. Let me come to the firewall again over here. So this is how we have created a rule, and now our user-based policies are working through a web authentication. Moving on to the client authentication. See, we have completed number one, where we have recalled the same thing what we did in our previous tutorial. We have created a user-based firewall rule for web authentication. Using the same user-based firewall rule, we will now use the client-based authentication. Let me again call a captive portal over here. Here you will see access the user portal. Basically, see, for calling the firewall GUI, you use the IP address of the firewall colon 4444. If you will see the captive portal, it is redirecting on port 8090, the IP address of the firewall colon 8090. For user portal, simply you have to call the IP address. Let me just click this. Even from here you can go access the user portal. See, it's simply a IP address. Let me show you again even by typing the IP address, and it is opening the same page, user portal. So either you can go from this, access the user portal when the captive portal open, or else if you want to download a client, you can even go directly from the link. I mean, calling the IP address in the browser, https colon the IP address of your firewall. So you will be putting the username over here. Let's say I put IT underscore admin is the username, and I will put the password to log into the user portal. So guys, this is over here you got your own portal where it will give you the details about your usage information. We will move on to the third option, download client. From the left pane of this interface, download a client, you will see like download for Windows authentication clients are there, authentication client. So download for Windows, for Mac OS, Linux, and so on. We are interested to download in our Windows because we are using Windows machine. I will simply download for Windows. Okay, it will get downloaded. Click on keep to keep this file. Okay, just let me take you to the firewall once. Even going to the authentication, you can download from the firewall also. You will see here client downloads. From the firewall also you can download, but let's say for example you have 100 of users in your company, so you won't be just sharing the same file with everyone. So the recommended practice is the user can download the client from his or machine using this user portal. Okay, so I will run this setup, the one which I have downloaded now, that is the client authentication client, you can say. I will run. Since I am in the domain, before installing it will ask me for the administrator username and password. If it was not in domain, you would have done directly. It would have it, if it would have not been in the control of yours, or like your administrator involvement was not there, you would have downloaded directly. But since this machine is controlled by the domain, so I need to put the administrator username and password. I will say next, next, install. Till the time it is installed, I will just take you to the quick overview. It is saying you are about to install a certificate from a certification authority CA claiming to represent client authentication. Okay, the CA certificate. This is one tutorial which we will be looking how you can install the CA from the I mean, download the CA certificate from the firewall and import it to the pieces. In the coming tutorial, we will be seeing. For now, simply say, do you want to install this certificate? Yes. Till it is installed, I will take you to the firewall and I will show you the reporting part. I mean the monitoring part. You go to current activities, live user. You can see now IT consultant is one of the user which is connected. Okay, if you will see live connection, you can see by application wise, you can see by username. This is application, this is username, or even through a source IP address. You can see who is accessing what kind of thing. This we will discuss in detail when we will be doing a tutorial on logs and monitoring and reporting. Okay, moving on. Let's see if it is downloaded, installed. Yes, it is installed. You will check this box, run client authentication agent, so that it will run. For now, click on finish. And one more thing, this is a live user, right? Just let me check this box and I will disconnect from the firewall. If, like, let's say for example, client PC2 is there on this, it is authenticated through some user. What I want, being administrator of the firewall, a firewall administrator, I want this particular user to be disconnected. I can disconnect it from here. I have the control. Okay, you will click on disconnect, selecting this user, you will click on disconnect. It is saying message won't be sent to the clientless user. You have been disconnected by admin. This is a message usually goes when you are using a client. This also we will check when we are installing the client now. For now, you will say disconnect and the user will be disconnected. However, he won't get any message because it is a clientless user. You have click on disconnect and you will see the internet is not working now, right? Because it is disconnected. Let me close this also. And even over here, we will be installing the client. HTTPS colon double slash 10.1.1.200. Oh, okay, it's calling from the cache. Okay, so access the user portal. What I will do is new private window. Okay, we'll fix it, this also, not an issue. But for this over here, let's see first. Let me open the authentication client very first. This is the authentication client which is running. I will just double click on this. We'll say connect, right click and connect. Okay, I will put the username and I will simply give the password. If you want to save the password, you can save it and simply say okay. Meanwhile, what I'm going to do, I will copy this to the client PC2 and I will run the client over here also. Since this is not a domain control PC, it is not even asking me for any username and password. I will simply say next, next, install. So over here, coming over here on the client PC1, where we have authenticated through a authentication client. Okay, if you will see now, this is connected. Let's go to the firewall and just refresh this. You will see that uh, we have been connected on 10.1.1.150, the same PC. This from this client. Okay, client type is authentication agent. Earlier it used to be a web authentication, right? Let me repeat again. Let me show you again. On this client PC2, what I am going to do, I will be going through a web authentication just to show you the differences. Okay, I'll call and I will open the login page. I will use different user. Okay guys, so see the difference over here. Coming to the firewall again, refresh, and you will see that IT underscore admin on the same PC 10.1.150 is connected through a authentication agent, whereas on the another PC 10.1.100 the username IT underscore consultant is connected through a web client. So it gives you the full detail also from where you have connected. Now what I'm going to do, this authentication agent, the PC which is connected through authentication agent, I will simply click on disconnect. This is the message. If you want to customize, you can customize, or else it will be saying that you have been disconnected by an admin. Simply click on disconnect. Okay, see, you got a message. Administrator disconnected you. You have been disconnected by an admin. So this is how authentication client agent work. Okay. And one more thing, we haven't checked our internet connectivity after connecting through a client. Let's check that as well. So from the color gray, it is changed to red. It means it is connected now. Okay. What I am going to do now, we will directly call a internet link. Let's go to google.com, and you can see that through a client authentication also your internet is working, right? Either in the first scenario we have seen a web authentication where we have authenticated through a web browser, and in this scenario we are authenticating through a client, and we can see that we are able to reach the internet through a client authentication as well. So over here we have completed the second part also. In the first part we have recall the user-based firewall rules for web authentication. Using the same user-based firewall rule, we have seen how the client-based authentication work, how you can manage using a client-based authentication, and finally moving on to the local authentication. See guys, till now we were using the Active Directory users only, right? Okay. Moving on, we will be going to not to authentication. Yeah, authentication. In the left pane, we will go to authentication. We will create one local user, okay, and we will say add. I will give the name Sophos, username Sophos. Name also will be Sophos, and over here, the user type will be user, and I will give one password over here. Email address is mandatory, but you don't need any kind of email where some kind of acknowledgement or anything is required. So I will say test@test.com. You can use anything, but when you work in the corporate, better use a proper email address for the user for the accounting purpose and all. Okay. Group, I will say open group. Unlimited internet access. Over here, if you will see, you can define a policy on the users. In the firewall rule, when we were creating, it was a schedule, right? Where you can define a schedule, like from so and so hours this policy should work. For internet, this policy should work from so and so hours within a weekdays, weekend time, this much time, the age and everything you can define. Over here, per user you can define a policy. Surfing quota, like you want unlimited internet access, 1 month unlimited access, 1 month 100 hours, there are so many options. Even you can create new as per your requirement, like you can say every day 1 hour and so on. Whatever is a requirement, accordingly you can define a policy for user, for a particular user. Access time allowed all the time, denied all the time, allow only during working hours, and so on. There are other options, or you can create on your own. So what I'm going to do, I will keep this default for now. Network traffic and traffic shaping we are not doing. If you want to do net traffic shaping, you can do network traffic. You can define. There are options. So it's up to you. As per your requirement, you can modify the user. For now, we are not doing any kind of a VPN tutorials around. So L2TP, PPTP, IP remote access, SSL VPN policy, we will be applying no. Moving on, finally, this we will keep the default option simultaneous sign in. See over here, you can either use simultaneous sign in, user global, use global setting, or you can say unlimited, or you will see use global setting. It's up to you. If you say unlimited, then one user can simultaneously sign in at multiple times. For now, you will keep the default setting, use global setting, sign in restriction user group node, and simply save the user. Now we have saved the user with the name Sophos. Okay. Moving on, we will be going to rules and policies. We will be using over here the local authentication. And earlier, if when we were just defining a AD server, at that time we have seen over here in the authentication going to services, we have seen that the local authentication server was already added by default. Okay. So this is also required actually. So it's already there by default. We will move on to rules and policies. We simply going to the LAN to WAN rule, which we have already configured earlier in our earlier tutorial. In the same rule over here, match known user any, you can define. Over here we will not say any, and we will, what we will do, we will define a user only now, which we have created, the Sophos, right? And save it. Let me just disconnect this. Okay, so now the user Sophos is created. Let me open the internet access. We'll check if our internet is working. We will be trying to authenticate to a local user now. I got a sign in page. I will say Sophos, and I will give the password to sign in. You can see the internet is working through a local authentication also. This is how local authentication works. Additionally, one more thing, as you have done for this particular PC which is in domain, similarly this local authentication will work using this also, because there is nothing difference. I mean, you are authenticating through a local like a Sophos firewall authentication, not Active Directory. So whether the PC is in domain or it is not in domain, it doesn't matter. Just we will check the local authentication through client also. I will say over here, earlier I have saved the password. Okay, so I will not say connect. I will just right click on this and I will set the credentials, the new credentials I will save. So force into 3, I will click on OK. The client is connected. I will again try to browse the internet. So even through the client authentication, it is working. Let's go to the firewall reports. Sorry, current activities, live user. You will see that in our PC2, which earlier only we have connected when we were looking after the authentication client through AD. That time we have connected, that is still connected, and this time we have tried to authenticate through a client for the local user, that is Sophos, and you can see authentication agent through that it is connected. Okay, so this is how we have, this is how we configure the local authentication. So guys, just to recall, uh, at the beginning we have seen the captive portal and we have configured a user-based firewall rule for web authentication. Then the same rule we have used for client-based authentication, and finally we have seen how local authentication work. So guys, if you have any doubt, any questions for this tutorial, please feel free to comment me in the comment box and I will be answering your queries as soon as possible. So that's all about for this tutorial. In the next tutorial, we will be proceeding further with installation of CA certificates. We will be looking after the SSL VPN, site-to-site VPN, logging and monitoring, and lot to come in the future tutorial, in the coming tutorials, guys. So thanks for watching my tutorial, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and share with your friends. Thanks, and see you in the next tutorial.